When people imagine the fall of Rome, they picture barbarians storming the gates, legions scattering, or emperors being poisoned in marble and gold palaces. But empires don't collapse only from outside attacks. They rot from within. And one of the most corrosive forces is always money. Rome didn't fall just because of invasions or corruption. It fell because its currency collapsed. And the lessons from that collapse still apply to every modern economy that thinks it can play games with money and walk away unharmed. Let's set the stage. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. First minted around 211 BC, the denarius was nearly pure silver and trusted across the entire empire and beyond. Roman soldiers were paid with it, merchants demanded it, and ordinary people stored their wealth in it. The denarius wasn't just money, it was trust in metal form. The strength of the empire and the value of its coin were intertwined. As long as people believed in Rome, they believed in its money. But running an empire is expensive. Legions had to be paid, roads and aqueducts had to be built, and wars had to be financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was weakened by defending its borders from Germanic tribes, Parthians in the east, and internal unrest. Tax revenues couldn't keep up with military spending. So the emperors turned to an old trick, debasement. Instead of taxing citizens more, which was always unpopular, they simply reduced the silver content in the denarius. The numbers tell the story. Under Emperor Augustus, at the dawn of the empire, the denarius was about 95% silver. By the time of Caracalla in the early 3rd century, it had dropped to about 50%. By the mid-3rd century, under Emperor Gallienus, it contained less than 5% silver. The once solid silver coin had become a bronze disc dipped in silver. People could see it, they could feel it. And then came inflation. Prices rose because money was no longer tied to real value. A unit of wheat that once cost a single denarius suddenly cost dozens. This wasn't theory. It destroyed the lives of ordinary Romans. Soldiers demanded higher pay to keep up with rising costs. Merchants stopped accepting devalued coins and preferred trade or gold. Local economies reverted to bartering because the currency couldn't be trusted. And the more trust eroded, the more cheap coins emperors minted, hoping volume would replace value. It was a vicious cycle, one repeated in countless inflations since. The crisis peaked during the so-called crisis of the 3rd century. Between AD 235 and 284, Rome endured nearly 50 years of chaos, invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell at a dizzying pace, sometimes ruling only months before being assassinated. Behind all the political drama was a broken financial system. Taxes were demanded in a currency losing value every day. Farmers abandoned their land to avoid paying them. Trade networks collapsed, and Rome tried desperate measures, price controls, forced labor obligations, to keep the system alive. None of it worked. Emperor Diocletian tried to stop the bleeding. In AD 301, he issued the edict on maximum prices, freezing the cost of more than 1,000 goods and services. From grain to wages, violators faced death. It was a disaster. You can't freeze prices when the money itself is worthless. A huge black market exploded and official trade nearly collapsed. People quickly learned that no law could fix broken money. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius altogether. In AD 312, Emperor Constantine introduced the solidus, a consistently pure gold coin. It brought some stability to the Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire for centuries. But by then, the Western Empire was fatally weakened. The denarius collapse had hollowed out Rome's economic core. Armies could no longer be maintained, trade networks had broken apart, and trust had evaporated. Rome's fall wasn't a single event. It was a long dissolution. And the collapse of its currency was one of the sharpest turning points. So what does this mean for us today? It means that the death of money always becomes the death of empires. Rome thought it could fool its people by minting coins that looked the same but held less real value. Modern governments think they can do the same, by printing paper, manipulating interest rates, or inflating debt. But the outcome is always the same. The public pays the price. Wealth disappears. Trust collapses. Rome learned this the hard way. Ignore it today, and we'll learn it the hard way too. History didn't stop teaching after Rome. Every major inflation crisis since has followed the same pattern. Governments devalue money to cover their costs. The elites protect themselves with real assets, and ordinary people go bankrupt. Rome's currency crisis is the earliest full-scale blueprint of collapse. Fast forward to the 20th century, the echoes are deafening. After World War I, Germany faced crushing reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. Believing it could cover its obligations by printing marks, just as Rome once minted more coins, the government turned on the printing presses. By 1923, hyperinflation had taken over. A loaf of bread that cost 1 mark before the war cost over 200 billion marks by autumn that year. People pushed wheelbarrows of banknotes down the street. Retirees starved as their life savings evaporated. Just like in Rome, debtors saw their debts erased through inflation, while those with real assets, land, factories, foreign currency, emerged stronger. Money became meaningless, and the desperation paved the way for political extremism, including Hitler's rise. Zimbabwe followed the same script in the 2000s. Land seizures, falling production, and rising debt pushed the government to the printing press. By 2008, inflation reached a mind-bending 89.7 sextillion% annually. Prices doubled daily. Shops couldn't change labels fast enough. Zimbabwe's currency had to be abandoned entirely. People were forced to trade in US dollars or South African rand. Once again, the government thought it could cheat reality. Once again, the people paid the price. And you don't even need extreme examples. Even in modern developed economies, the Roman pattern lives on. Take the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, cutting the last link between the currency and something real. From that moment, the dollar became what economists call fiat money, backed not by gold, but by trust in the government. And just like Rome, the temptation to spend beyond limits became irresistible. Debt ballooned. The money supply expanded, inflation became a constant silent tide. We don't push wheelbarrows of cash, but we see a steady erosion of purchasing power. $1 in 1971 buys more than $6 today. The coins look the same, the bills look the same, but their value has been hollowed out. The trick is always the same. Governments disguise inflation as growth. They claim rising wages mean prosperity even when costs climb faster. They present debt as investment even when it only fuels consumption. They point to stock markets as proof of wealth, even though most people own almost none of it. Like Roman emperors, they insist nothing fundamental has changed, while quietly extracting value from every coin, every bill, every paycheck. What makes this era more dangerous is scale. Rome's collapse was an imperial crisis. Weimar's was national. Zimbabwe's was local. But today the entire world runs on fiat currencies, massive debts, and central banks ready to print trillions at the first sign of trouble. That means the next collapse won't be limited to one empire or nation. It will spread everywhere. And if history is a guide, the ones who suffer won't be the elites holding assets. It will be millions of ordinary people depending on salaries, pensions, and savings in increasingly fragile currencies. So what should you, as an individual, take from Rome's currency crisis? First, understand that inflation isn't an accident. It is a policy, the silent tax that has been destroying empires for 2,000 years. Second, recognize that real wealth isn't in paper or numbers on a screen. It is in assets that hold value when money doesn't. Land, skills, productive businesses, resources. Third, never assume stability is permanent. A Roman in the 1st century would laugh at the idea that their money could one day be worthless. A German in 1913 would scoff at wheelbarrows full of cash. A Zimbabwean in the 1980s believed independence meant prosperity. And yet the same story unfolded every time. Rome's fall reminds us that financial systems collapse slowly at first, then suddenly, as trust evaporates. When money stops being real, society begins to unravel. Contracts fail, trade breaks down, armies disband, and governments lose legitimacy. The barbarians at the gates may finish the job, but the real killer is always inside the treasury. And here's the punchline. History doesn't repeat, but if you fail to understand it, it will crush you just the same. Rome's currency crisis wasn't just about bad emperors or greedy elites. It was about the fragility of money when abused by power, and that fragility has never disappeared. If this gave you a new idea or a new perspective, hit the subscribe button. History knows the answers, and I'll show you where to look.